We Are Vineyard.
In prayer, it was like, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
And the Lord was like, that is precisely why you have to write this book.
Right.
Because I never resolved the question of how do I trust God, ever through that. In the second chapter of my book, there's this line where I say, so if we can't trust God to keep bad things from happening to us, how do we trust God at all? I stopped writing, which I don't normally do. I stopped because I was like, I literally don't have an answer.
What do I say next?
There's no others.
Right.
I don't have the answer. I don't have the next sentence. That is the question that my soul had to ask, and I had not articulated it. And I stopped, and I walked away from the computer, and I stayed away for week and a half, a long time for me, because I write every day, all the time. I just didn't write, because I was like, I don't have an answer.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathak, National Director for Vineyard USA, talks to Tish Warren, author of Prayer in the Night. Today's episode is part 2 of 2 episodes with Tish. Let's listen in.
So let's pivot toward writing. So when do you realize, I think I can write? When does that happen?
I mean, there's multiple times a week where I say I cannot write.
Well, that's part of being a writer, is thinking you're not a writer. I get that part.
This is it.
But when did you go, wait a minute, I can do this?
I, unlike many of the people in the Vineyard, do not typically have the kind of relationship with God where I feel like there's clarity, where it feels like God speaks to me or says things or guides me clearly, ever.
Right.
When people would say, even about marrying Jonathan, is this what God's called you to do? I'm like, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I remember walking down the aisle being like, well, if this is wrong, give one of us a heart attack or the pastor a heart attack, because here we go.
Intervene somehow.
Yeah, because so I don't have that. God spoke to me, God said to me, God told me go do that. So I say that to say that when I was in prayer around 2009, 2010, I would feel this suffocating need and desire to write. And it came somewhat out of nowhere. I mean, in the sense that I always enjoyed writing, and I wrote a lot in seminary for papers and stuff, and would get good feedback, you're a good writer, keep writing, But I was never I'm going to be a writer, I was going to be a parish priest or I was going to work with homeless folks, I had done, or postmoderns, but that's not a thing anymore, but city folk. And I was doing that. I was in campus ministry, and that was great. So some of it was I just had this overwhelming sense that I was going to write, but still not be a writer. I mean, it was just I want to try that, So I took a poetry class, of writing poetry that I loved. I mean, it was like falling in love. I just loved this class. I wrote a ton. It was a postgrad, for folks who had graduated college but weren't in a postgrad program, wanted to just kind of try their hand at this. But they paired us with a poetry professor or a poet, and so he would give feedback, and it was awesome. So that happened around the same time. I was writing a lot more for my campus ministry job, which is a whole other story. But basically, there was a need for communication, and so my supervisor was like, "Can you head up a blog for us where we're writing more about theology, writing more about kind of what's happening on campus?" And blogs were somewhat new at the time. I mean, not wildly new, but it was the age of the blog. So I was doing that for my gig, still very small part of my job.
Right.
And then there was something called Women in the Academy and Professions, part of InterVarsity, and they had an online magazine. They did not call it a blog. I think because it was edited. They had an actual editor that curated and edited things, which is different than blogs. So this editor and I met each other, connected at an InterVarsity thing because I was on staff with them and she was too. And then she just asked me to write. Actually, the first thing I wrote, we were in a conversation where I said, keeping the Sabbath saved my marriage. And she was like, that's interesting. Can you write on that? And I was like, okay. So, I mean, it was like a very small outlet, right? You know, like, it's like, okay. So then she called me and said, you have a voice. You need to write. You have a voice. She kept saying that and kept calling me. Would you write for us? Would you write for us monthly? Would you write, you know, and it was like in a very loving way, like nagging me essentially. And I was like, I have kids. Like I mean, I had a brand new baby. It was our first. And so it was like, I'm in ministry. Like my husband's in grad school. We make no money. Like I can't have hobbies.
Right.
But she just sort of kept asking. And again, like I just kept feeling like I've got to write. Like I have to write. And so it was like, I had this internal sense I needed to write, but then all there was this opportunity that was like literally calling me on the phone, nagging me to do this. And so I started writing for her just like occasionally. And then I wrote this piece called Courage in the Ordinary that ended up years later sort of morphing kind of the same concepts of sort of Liturgy of the Ordinary, my first book, but that was years later. But so I wrote this piece, and 4 or 5 months after it came out, and I say that just because this doesn't happen online. Like you don't have if you have a piece, it goes viral or it doesn't go viral 5 months after you did it. But 5 months after, somehow, and he doesn't remember how this happened, but Andy Crouch came across it and he liked it a lot and he just tweeted it out and he said, I remember the words because it was a big deal. Andy Crouch. I was like not known at all. I didn't have a Twitter account. I had nothing. It was not known. And he said, this is so good. Tweeted it. And then it just went crazy viral. I mean, like, I got letters from, like, people in Zambia reading it. Like, just crazy. And so then I wrote Andy and just said, like, whatever his, like, public account was, you know, and said, like, thank you for tweeting this. This really got so many people seeing it. And thank you for sending it. And he said, well, thanks for putting this out there. And he said, yeah, you're welcome. And you're a good writer. If you ever want to pitch for CT, do it. And so this is my one piece of advice for people. I mean, I was so excited. Like, this just seemed like a whole new world to me, you know? And so the one advice I have to writers is if someone asks you to pitch and pitch soon before they forget who you are.
Right.
Don't be like, oh, I think about it for a year. Like, just like,
just write something. Right.
So I wrote a piece, showed it to him. He said no. Wrote another piece on a different topic. And
this is not the way it should go in the movie. It's supposed to be just meteoric rise. Yeah, you.
And then he, but the second one he liked, and there was this thing called hermeneutics. It doesn't exist anymore. It was a women's blog channel thing that was part of CT. And so they moved me to that editor. It was a piece on Miley Cyrus, and I wrote this piece, and it was on Miley Cyrus and the need for rites of passage in the church. It was confirmation. It was the need for confirmation. And so then I worked with the editor there. Her name's Kate Shellnut. She's still at CT, and she was amazing. She's an incredible editor. And so, like, it went well. Like, we had a good rapport, and so then I just kept pitching to her. And then... so I would just write for them occasionally, was writing for the Well occasionally, and at some point said, okay, I'm doing this fairly frequently. Like, this is a real hobby. Yeah. It was a hobby. It was not making money. Right. I mean, CT, I think, paid, but it was like, you know, $50 every 4 months when I would publish them. So it's not like, I'm not going to live on this. Right. So an intentional hobby, if you can say. So we had little tiny kids, and
but it's fun.
Jonathan was working more than me, going back and forth. So he would take them for basically an hour and a half when they woke up like 6:30, 7 to like 8:30, 9 in the morning. And he would take the kids sort of first shift. I would nurse the baby. He'd take the kids. And then that was it. I had like an hour and a half, 4 days a week. And that was all I had. That was it. That was the whole time. And so I just kept writing.
So wait, you built an intentional window.
Every
morning.
First thing in the morning.
I'm just going to write stuff.
I'm just going to write. Yeah.
And do you have like topics floating around in your head? And
always.
You have them on a board somewhere?
No, yeah. If I was more organized,
or just
I would have had them on a board. But so I'm changing diapers during the day and thinking about...
Right. Things just come to mind.
Writing pieces in my brain, right? Like and it did feel like the season... I mean, I've been a writer long enough now. This has gone away. But it was a season of ferment, and that I just had so many ideas and I had so much to say, and it felt like, I don't even have time to write all the things I want to write. It was a grace that at times I have not had. That it was just sort of like the Lord pouring ideas into me and just sentences, literal sentences that would sort of leap out, and I have to put that in I have to write that in a piece. And man, that's like it's absolutely the honeymoon period of writing. And you should write it out as long as you can, because it goes away. Because now it's like, oh, dear Jesus, would you just throw me a bone, give me anything to say? What happened was I just started writing like pieces, and then people started reading those pieces, and then they would ask me to write.
Right.
Well, could you write for us? Or could you do something on Lent, or whatever, like, could you? And so then I just started people started asking, so I started writing more, and then people started asking, and I started writing more, and then at some point, I mean, it was another crisis, a smaller crisis, but I looked up and said, it was a little bit after I knew some people at IVP. That's a whole other story. It was through a series of relationships. And they asked me if I would write a book. And then we said, like, oh God, like, this isn't a hobby anymore.
Yeah, this is gonna change our life, right?
Well,
you can't just do this for an hour in the morning.
The book was going to change my life, because most Christian books don't. I mean, most Christian books just die.
Right.
And so I wasn't like, this is my path to the,
No. I mean, just by your own vocation.
This is too much time to be calling a hobby.
Right.
So we need to decide, am I going to step back and not do this, or are we going to like actually like do this as like this part of my vocation? And you're like,
decided,
let's try it. Let's try it. Right. And so it's kind of just grown and then the Liturgy of the Ordinary exploded. I mean, it was just like, it just blew up, it just changed my life. And then you get asked to write more. So it just, there is a tendency to especially now, I started writing 10 years ago now. So this is changed. Like, so I told that story short, but this happened slowly over time, right? So this has changed even since then. But there's the tendency now to build a platform through social media, and then from the platform, like, get writing kind of gigs. But I think, and this language is from Karen Swallow Prior, is that the work is the platform. So in the sense that, like, just focus on being a good writer, like being a good thinker, crafting good prose, and then you can't control the outcome. Like, I'm not saying, oh, if you're a good enough writer, then you'll end up, writing for a career. Like I have, like, all of that I think doesn't make sense without, it was just the Spirit. It was just led by the Spirit. And it doesn't make sense. And for whatever reason, God wants me to do what I'm doing right now. And I don't think he always will. Like, eventually, like, I might not write as much as I am. I hope so. Like, if I'm still writing this much at 65, I'm going to be so disappointed.
Wait, why? Wait, I don't understand that. Why?
Because I write constantly. I mean, I just write. I work like I have 5 deadlines all the time,
right?
And it's
overwhelming. So you'd be disappointed in that. That means I'm just working at this pace till I'm 65. That's a bad way to live.
I want to spend time. I'm lazy is what I mean. Like I just want to just rest. I want to bake some bread and chill out. I want to watch Seinfeld and eat SpaghettiOs on the couch. So I but I also, hopefully will like spend time with my children and go on walks and stuff, pray.
So you had one, I've heard 2 pieces of advice. One you gave directly and one you did not give directly. So I want to make sure I heard it correctly. First one is, if you're asked to pitch and do so quickly.
Yeah.
Second, which you didn't say as advice, but I'm taking as advice. If you start to think maybe I should be writing, make dedicated intentional time and space to do so.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty unusual what you described there. Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I'm in a busy window of my life. It would be easy to be like, I guess I'll do that when I have time or when it kind of something pops open, I might do it, which means you don't do it.
That's
usually.
Right.
But instead you said, no, there's this 1 hour and a half, which by the way, seems like almost no amount of time, by the way, to write. I mean.
Yeah, it was really short. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like to just get into it, you're like.
But I wasn't writing a book. I was writing short pieces.
Yeah. But you're just getting you're getting the muscle working, so to speak.
Absolutely. And you can't do it in one day. So the first day you just write a horrible first draft. Horrible. And then maybe you clean it up over the next 2 or 3 days. So when I say I'm writing, a lot of that time is editing. It's not like I'm literally generating new content for that time. But writing is editing. I mean, that's what it is.
It is. Yeah. Well, and setting aside the time to do so. Mm-hmm. That's I don't know many people that do what you just described.
Yeah, I think, who said this? I can't remember who this is. Maybe Ann Paget, or what is it? Pageant. I can't remember. Anyway, or maybe this is Annie Dillard. I don't remember. Someone who wrote a book on writing or an essay on writing that I read. But they said something like, if you have an idea that is just brewing and percolating in you, I've lost the ability to speak English because I'm so tired. But if percolating, growing, bubbling up in you, then give it 3 weeks. Just say, I'm going to give it 3 weeks
before I touch it.
No.
Oh, I start writing it.
I'm going to give 3 weeks to trying to,
writing it, cleaning it up, editing.
Not 8 hours a day, but for 3 weeks, I'm going to try to carve out intentional time for this. Maybe I can only do it every other day. Maybe I can only do it on Saturday for 3 weeks in a row, right? Like which certainly there were times where even during the kid gets strep throat, okay, I'm not writing.
Yep, we're done. Right.
Like I'll write on Saturday if he's better, but, just give it 3 weeks. And if the end of 3 weeks, you'll go, oh, there's something here. Or you'll go, I didn't really like that. Or you'll go, well, I didn't actually end up doing it this 3 weeks. So maybe it's not that big of a priority to me or not a passion of mine. Just fine. That's fine. Lots of us have good ideas that we don't run after, and that's okay too. So I think I've kept that in mind of hey, so just I have this piece, let me give it 2 weeks, see if something comes up. And if not, that's fine. Stop it.
Turn it loose.
Yeah, turn it loose. Exactly. Just try it and see, it's fine. Right now, particularly if you're doing nonfiction writing. So I'm not talking about if you're writing a story about dwarves, that's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I have nothing.
It's a different thing.
I don't know how to speak into that. But the hardest part of writing by far is not actually carving out time for it, although that is really hard. And it's not actually the craft, which is really hard. But it's thinking well. If you're thinking well, it will help write well. I mean, if you're writing well, it will also help you think well. Yes. So there's a cyclical relationship here. But I think that we get stuck in certain kind of talking points, assumptions, unthought through presuppositions and questions and sort of like memes. I mean, it's and not necessarily memes, but like these things that are said again and again. I mean, I texted my friend Esau yesterday, and I just said, because I'd been looking at social media, and I texted him and I said, it is the same 5 things that are said by the left and the right on social media. And it is, above all, just profoundly boring. I mean, all the cultural stuff is just, at the end of the day, boring. And I think that if you're on social media a lot, you end up getting stuck in gutters, like in the sense that I don't mean gutter in like a derogatory sense. I'm thinking of like bowling lanes,
like a rail,
like when you gutter the ball, a ditch, ruts. And that's just kind of how your thinking goes. And so then we end up with people with this like incredibly, something comes out and I'm like, okay, this person's just going to have like the knee-jerk conservative response to this. I can already hear it. Like, or this person's going to have like the knee-jerk progressive response. Or this sometimes it's this person's going to have the knee-jerk provocative, or like being the provocateur or whatever. You don't have to open the social media to like know what's being said. It's so predictable, and it's so the same thing, And so I think that's real formative of our brains and the way we think. But to write well, like you just got to get out of the ruts. You have to get out of that. And so you need other things that are input that are challenging that. So one of the things, like very, very basic, this is a practice, but I think it's a practice that breeds wisdom, is like turn off social media. Like really, if you want to be a good writer, like get away from social media. Now, I will say I'm not on social media, and I've seen in ways it hurts my writing, because in that it does help to know the conversations happening, and sometimes I'm pretty out of touch with the conversations happening, so I can step on a landmine I didn't know was a landmine, because I was like, I didn't even know we were talking about that. It's helpful to see the conversation, but then you have to like not. It's just a tricky thing. Like you can't immerse yourself in it enough that you're shaped by it.
Yes.
Some of it is like the most important spiritual practice for writers is silence and silent prayer, because words become so ascendant in your life, and you can start to think that words are the savior. If you get the words right, that you can convince people of things, or that if you can write well enough, you can sort of write people into salvation, write reality into existence, like write like you're saving your life, Hamilton, why do you write like you're running out of time? Like you can just write compulsively, right? And so I think, practice of silence, that there's just like, just receiving from God, receiving if the Spirit speaks to you, or silence from God, and also just the limit of words. There's just things that I know. Yeah,
you can't get all the way around.
I'll never be able to say.
So tell me about that. When do you decide, okay, so there's this thing going on that I have some thoughts about, or there's this thing I want to engage. How do you decide what you will and won't?
What I will and won't do.
Either write or put out there. Maybe you write a thing and then you're like, I like what this is. I feel great about this, but I should probably just not say this right now.
It's really, really hard. I mean, I will say there's not like it's easy. Like I still struggle with this all the time. Should I write on this topic? Should I not? Should I address this topic or not? Some of it is I do have friends that I will send things to and ask, is this worth putting out there? Should I put this out there? Could you give me feedback? Some of it for me, I mean, at some point I decided that I wasn't going to write for things that didn't have an editor. This was part of my like belief in institutions as opposed to like individual brands. So I don't write blogs. I don't write, just put out my own thoughts.
Because it helps you to think you have the support of an editor, somebody who's going to think about audiences.
I need a gatekeeper to tell me, nope. Yes, what I mean is,
or not like this. This thing, not like this. Let's tune that down or tune that up.
And it's, for me, it's collaboration. It's, I need someone else outside of me who has skin in the game to say, this is worth saying, this is not worth saying. My first, like, art that I fell in love with was theater. Like, I was super theater kid in high school, really, really into it. And it's, like, such a collaborative art. Like, you can't do it alone. And so I've very much carried that into the writing world, that, like, I write collaboratively. I want to work with editors. I want to have feedback from other people. Like, I want to, which is another part of this, is, like, part of how to get out of the ruts of social media, is, like, have conversations about things in real life with people. You know, yesterday I had kind of an idea for the New York Times, but I'm not quite sure if it's right or if I'm thinking. So I just wrote 5 people that like have some knowledge of it, and just shared my thoughts and said, like, can you just help me think better about this? And that very well may never become a piece. But I'm just trying to think about it better. I'm just trying to think about this concept better. And maybe that'll become a piece, or maybe it'll just help me think better, right? And that's good too. So,
also good, right?
So some of it is I've kind of intentionally worked with gatekeepers. And also, this is one of the seductive things about social media, is that I noticed you could put things out real quick and easy. Didn't take a lot of your time. So because of that, just because there's not a lot, it doesn't require a lot of suffering from you or work. It's easy to comment on everything, and then maybe it'll blow up and I'll get attention and that'll feel good. Or maybe it'll blow up and get attention and it'll be a fight. But at the end of the day, I'm like, on a scale of 1 to 10, I care about that like 6 or 7. Like, I care about it, but I'm not going to like die on that hill.
Yeah, I don't want to pay costs for that.
Right. I don't want to pay a cost for that.
Right.
Whereas, so this is partly why, if it's not worth me writing a long form piece and going through the pain of that, like, then it's probably not worth talking about for me.
Yeah.
So yesterday I was thinking about a topic that I don't know much about, but I'm super interested in and want to get to know. And I like, well, this is, so I know a little bit about it. I know enough that I could write a piece about it for the Times. But it's a controversial idea, and I just thought, you know, I need to read more about this idea.
I need some more info.
And so I said, I don't need to write about this till I read 3 books on this, which is it's not a PhD. I won't be an expert. But like, and then I thought immediately, I don't have time. I don't have time to read 3 books on just this one topic.
So it's done. Right. Yeah.
And then I thought, well, if I don't care enough about this to read 3 books, then I need to keep my mouth shut. Like, I need to not do this. So some of this is like, ask yourself, do I care enough about this to like really learn? I guess that's all. I mean, I really am at the place, I have to write a piece a week for the New York Times now. So it is sort of sometimes like, I had eggs for breakfast. I like eggs. Maybe I should write about eggs. I mean, like, So to some extent, like, for me, I need to actually be like, no, go ahead. You need to write about some of this stuff. I have to sort of take the guardrails off in some ways. But I will say, like, in general, I think, just because literally this is my job. Like, someone will yell at me if I don't turn something in.
You have to do it. Right.
But even that, like, there are other things I could write about. I'm constantly asking people, hey, is this something I should talk about? Is this not? Last night I said, like, hey, you're a pastor. What are people talking about? What do I need to be writing on? What do I need to be thinking about? And I keep in mind, there's this Flannery O'Connor quote where somebody said, do you feel like writing programs are discouraging too many young writers? And she said, they're not discouraging nearly enough. Meaning, like, they're actually, I think the impulse is to be like, everything I have to say is interesting and should be said. And there needs to be some discouragement of that, which editors, oh my gosh, like, they're deflationary, like, in the best ways. And then this is why I think if you're writing on theology, it's really, really good. If not required, it's at least really good that you've been through seminary. I don't even think it's so that you can have all this great knowledge, because honestly, like, you don't get that. I mean, you get some in seminary, but not. But the experience of writing something that you truly do believe, earnestly believe, and having to turn it into a professor and them saying, no, not good enough.
Yeah.
You didn't argue that well enough.
Yep.
And you're like, but I sincerely think this. This is my experience.
Yes.
And then being like, I don't care. Do it better. Like that sort of like sad trombone, like deflationary moment is like such, so good for writer. I had this yesterday. I turned in this piece I thought was brilliant. And then she basically was like, this is underwritten and not good enough. And then like my yesterday was like 2 hours of emotionally dealing with that.
Yeah.
And then like find like an hour of editing and writing. Like it took like so much of it is like throwing a fit. I misunderstood.
Right.
Getting on it, and like working through that to get to the point where you're like, okay, whatever. Humble yourself.
Yeah.
Try again.
Each quarter on the We Are Vineyard podcast, we focus in on a theme for all of our interviews. For this quarter, the theme is power and presence. And every month, we introduce a new book or recommended resource to dig in deeper. For April, we've been recommending that everyone reads Prayer in the Night by Tish Warren. If you've been enjoying this conversation between Tish and Jay, you won't want to miss it. Prayer in the Night is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
What's interesting listening to you, because it's so different than preaching in that, first of all,
you get the editors after you get the sermon.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Truly. Like,
no, I know. I
like
preach,
you're preaching and there's no editors maybe there should be, but there aren't. Then you get whatever feedback you get and pressure you get. And so what a lot of preachers do is they take that sort of way of speaking and talking and then just put that into writing. And social media enables a manner of doing that. So in my opinion, preachers are shooting off at the mouth almost more than anyone else on social media. Or it becomes a medium by which normal people, quote unquote, people that aren't doing sort of professional ministry or have had theological education, have a pulpit, so to speak, in their mind that they're shooting out into the world. No editing.
It's an audience.
That's right.
Yeah.
No mediating forces. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting listening to you is you're choosing to do that before you're even hitting an editor. So you're doing your own personal editing in that you're asking friends like, should I write about this? Or am I going to read the books to do the thing? So that's before you're actually going to the institutional editing. I just find it so rare that people are willing to be that disciplined, to be submitted in their own mind, even to their own principles, and then being willing to be submitted to other people in the way you're describing.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not a confident person. So I don't know.
Maybe it's so I can get affirmation.
Yeah, totally. It absolutely is. So
That's funny.
It helps me to be like, okay, like,
oh, you think this is good?
It helps me to have feedback.
Right.
And, yeah.
Those are really helpful thoughts that I don't know that most people, because again, social media has made us all into having congregations and or platforms with no mediating forces, which creates a lot of cool opportunities, but it also creates a lot of pain. You know, I almost everyone I know that's done something very painful to people through social media, for example, with a statement or a thing they say or a thing they regret. If I just ask them, did you talk to anybody about this before you said this? The answer is always no. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just think there's something we talked about it earlier today about how do we think about the ethics of what we do in social media, specifically if we're leaders? What are the norms? What are we holding ourselves to? What do we hold one another to as brothers and sisters And I told you, the hardest part for me in this kind of conversation is having friends that don't have any faith, no life with Jesus, family that don't have any kind of life with Jesus. They're trying to figure out what I do for a living as a pastor. And when they watch people on Facebook or whatever be mean to one another as Jesus followers, and specifically mean to me, it just happened last week. I was playing golf with a guy that I've been talking to about my faith, and he's like, dude, you make people really angry. Like, why are people so mad at you? And it's this nuanced organizational phenomenon within the Vineyard. And that's really heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
The way it affects and impacts a witness. Like, we're so in our own little echo chamber.
Absolutely. The damage done to public witness by the way Christians act online is so awful.
Yeah.
Even from honestly, a sheer PR point of view, it's like, this is bad PR. I can tell you this. When I was hired by the New York Times, I had to read and commit to sign a very long ethics outline and an agreement, including ethics on social media, how we act on social media. I never had to do that as a clergy person. And so the standards and ethics demanded of New York Times writers and the way they interact on social media is higher than what has been required of ACNA clergy, at least. And it's wrong. I mean, if I called out people that were colleagues in my quote unquote secular, which I don't really believe in, but secular workplace, the way that I see priests call one another out or pastors calling it out, I would lose my job. And I think, why are the standards for the people following Jesus lower, right? The Coca-Cola or company, corporation would not allow their employees to talk about other employees publicly like this. Why does the Church of Jesus Christ allow this? It's crazy. It's madness. It's madness. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Well, it's in front of everybody, to your point. It's not even within Coca-Cola or the ACNA. Even in that context, you'd be like, hey, man, don't.
It's not a Slack channel, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't do that to your friend. It's in front of the whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think we're going to have to do a lot of work thinking about that. Okay, so let's pivot to your book, because we've asked me to read your book.
Can I say one more thing about that?
I would like you to say all you want to say.
Critics being well, what we're talking about is more important than what the Coca-Cola Corp is doing. And so we need to be discussing these things because either, because we're defending orthodoxy or because we're, defending justice and calling for justice. Right. I can see people saying that. I can also see people saying, well, they're silencing me. That's the whole thing. Well, I just want to say, if you are a clergy person, you need to let people silence you. I mean, that's so saying they're silencing me. Well, good. It's the Church of Jesus Christ. And I get it. I know everyone's well, what about, Galileo? And they silenced him. And I want to be yes, that's right. The church really, really screws up on this sometimes. What about, or more important, what about the black church or there's abuse here. And that's real. But saying you can't talk like that, you need to not constantly berate people on social media. That is not the same as silencing people about, racial justice. The other thing here here's the other thing. Is that you're probably not Galileo. I mean, there's an arrogance to that of you're not Martin Luther King Jr. You're not Galileo. And the assumption there is so arrogant. But also, both of those people, all of those people were willing to actually suffer for what they were saying.
Yes.
It wasn't just a tweet where then they were going to go have a sandwich or whatever. And this was they suffered for this. And they actually spoke far more privately, far more institutionally, far more with like smaller, I'm not talking about Galileo here necessarily, but like the prophets, the idea, everyone wants to be prophetic, you know? Now it's like we have just such a high view of the prophetic, such a low view of like humility and the pastoral. But the thing is like, when God actually called a prophet, the prophet's first response was always like, no, like, I don't want to do this. And the places in my life that I'm most prophetic, quote unquote, I just get beaten up. Like, it doesn't get likes. And so I do just feel like there's a grandstanding that happens. And people then saying, you know, that they're being silenced or whatever. And particularly if you have church, if you're an Anglican, your bishop should absolutely have authority to silence you. But I understand that there's abuses here, but I just want to say there's abuses the other way too. Like that there's just more than one way to fall off the horse here. And I think in 21st century America and social media, when you're appealing to these like examples where the church had lots of power and abused that power to justify like today where the church has almost no power. I mean, just we don't have power.
Right.
And so even, you know, a bishop or your pastor saying like, maybe not be such a jerk on social media. And it's like, they're silenced. I'm just like the, you know, whatever. I'm just like Athanasius who got exiled.
Right.
It's like, no.
You were just rude. Yeah. That was just unkind. No, that's super helpful.
That's what I'm saying. Just like if your first thing is like they're silencing me, like maybe they are silencing you. And maybe that's good.
Well, it's good for everybody, including you, by the way. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good. So tell me about your book, Prayer in the Night.
Prayer in the Night came out.
Why did you write it?
A year ago. I wrote that book. There's a longer answer because I didn't want to write it. I really, really didn't.
Oh, okay. Tell me why not.
Okay. Well, I'll give you the longer
answer.
I want to hear that. The shorter answer was I was starting to write a different book, which would also have been a good book, I think. But as I went to my friend Jane and Alex's house, they were out of town and let me use their house to come and like kind of retreat and like pray about this book and start writing this other book. And as I started, I go on walks a lot as part of my writing process. So I'm walking and I just have this other idea for the structure of this book, to do a book around this one prayer in Compline, which is Anglican nighttime prayers, that gets into issues of like theodicy and the suffering, so, like how can God be good and bad things happen in the world, good and all powerful, and bad things happen in the world. And I said, so this idea came, and it was like once the idea was there, I could not let it go. It was like a cat that just kept showing up. And every time I tried to write this other book, it was like this little, like, it was like nipping at my heels.
Still here.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
You know, you need to write this. And it became like, so the other book I was writing was much more like didactic and theological, more focused on the creeds. And I realized like I was using theology to avoid my actual question, my actual faith struggle, which is like, I don't know if God is good and I don't know if I can trust him. And so it was like in the process of writing this, God was like, you're writing a book about me to avoid me. And so then, but I was like, I don't want to write this book. And I didn't want to write it for 3 reasons. Like, number one, I was like, I can't write about a book about suffering because my life hasn't been that bad. Like, I'm white. I'm privileged. My parents, with all their faults, loved me, wasn't beaten, don't have a terminal illness. I haven't lost a child. For a long time, I thought the only people who could really write books on suffering were people who lost children, because that just sort of seems like the worst thing. So I was like, I haven't suffered. I can't write a book on this.
Right. I'm not allowed. Right.
I'm not allowed. It's going to just seem whiny.
Right.
So the second one was, if I write this book and put it out there and it does well, everyone who reads it, every time I speak, people are going to come up and tell me the worst thing that ever happened to them. Like they're going to need so much pastoral care.
Yeah.
And they're going to look to me for that. And I can't do it. Like I can't emotionally.
That. Right. Yeah.
I barely trust you as it is. And I don't want to emotionally hear everyone's worst story. I'm not going to be able, I don't know. Could I emerge from that and still be a believer?
Yeah.
And then the third reason was, this was 2017, which is the events in the book. The book sort of starts and centers around my year of 2017, which is in 1 year I moved across the country from my home, Texas, to Pittsburgh. A week later, my dad died fairly suddenly. Then a month later, I had a miscarriage. And then I got pregnant again, surprisingly, joyfully, and then had this long, hard pregnancy where I was on bed rest and lost the baby, a son, at its second trimester. So the point is, during that time, and it was just a hard time. I was depressed. I don't get into this in the book, but since we had been talking about this earlier, my marriage was so hard. Marriage was rough that year. I was in a dark place where, as I say in the book, I was a priest, I was a leader in the church, and I couldn't pray and was really struggling. You sent me to a Mumford & Sons concert in the middle of all that. Do you remember that? Or just around that time? Because I had suffered. And then he called me up and was like, do you want to go to Mumford & Sons right now? Which was beautiful because I was the things were really, really, really bad and really dark. Anyway, and so this was 2018. It had been about a year later there'd been this profound healing in our marriage. Things were good. And I wasn't all better, but I was coming out of that. It was the possibility that I might not always feel sad was opening up. There may be joy. I had fun at the Mumford & Sons concert. Things might. And so it was I was God,
I don't want to go back into that.
I cannot go back there. I do not want to deal with that. That is can we just close that?
Right.
Close the drawer and walk away. So the first one, as I talked to people, as I talked to friends, it felt and as I prayed, and as I thought about the Christian books that were already out there, there's a lot of Christian books on tragedy and people really, really awful suffering, and they're good. We need more.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. But I just thought, especially as I was talking to others, it was oh, no. This is not a bug, it's a feature. We need to talk about suffering. The whole concept that suffering is this thing that only belongs to one class of people who've had especially terrible lives means that the vast majority of us, aren't dealing with our suffering, aren't dealing with our pain. So having conversations with a friend of mine, he just was talking about struggles with his kids, and his wife has a degenerative illness, which is big, but she's gonna it's not gonna kill her. It made it where she couldn't drive anymore and stuff. So she's gonna be okay, but it's hard. It's a hard thing. Yeah. And he said something just the mundane, he said ordinary suffering, and I thought, there's just a lot of suffering in an ordinary life, in an ordinary day. And that needs to be talked about too. The third is, it just felt in prayer in particular, it was the Lord was saying, because the third was I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
And the Lord was that is precisely why you have to write this book. Because I never resolved the question of how do I trust God ever through that. Things got a little better, and so there's a book in the second chapter of my book. There's this, I think it's second, maybe first, but there's this line where I say, so if we can't trust God to keep bad things from happening to us, how do we trust God at all? And I stopped writing, which I don't normally do. I stopped. because I was like, I literally don't have an answer.
What do I say
like,
next?
There's no others.
Right.
Like, I don't have the answer. I don't have the next sentence. That's the question. That is the question that my soul had to ask, and I had not articulated it. And I stopped, and I walked away from the computer, and I stayed away for like week and a half, like a long time for me, because I write like every day, all the time. Like I'm running out of time. I just didn't write because I was like, I don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, okay, like you gotta, like you're under contract, and the money's been spent, so you got it. So it really took like 80,000. I wrote 80,000 more words after that, which is just gargantuan for a popular book, and whittled it down to 40,000 over to a year and a half.
Wow.
Of struggling with that. And that's what it took for me to be able to answer that question, to be able to do that. So when people are like, what's the answer? I'm like, it's the rest of the book. It's like the whole thing.
Yeah, and 40,000 I cut.
And 40,000 I cut.
Right.
Which some were rubbish, right? But I had to go through all.
Yeah, you got to get it all out. Yeah.
Maybe I can't trust you. I mean, that's a legitimate, like, so walking through. So it was like, yep, you want to get done with this, move on, and you're not. Like, your soul's not done. Mm-hmm. And so you're not done till I say you're done. You know, it's like I say, my kids eating dinner. You're not done with your vegetables till I say.
Till I say. Yeah.
So in a loving way, in a gentle, kind way, where he, I mean, really, truly, so gentle and kind, he like made me sit down and write this.
Finish. Yeah.
Yeah. And provided money so I could do it and still feed my family. And then the last thing, which has been really beautiful, is absolutely like when I speak and when I talk about this stuff, people come up and tell me about these horrible, about when their child died, when their spouse left them, when they, you know, everything fell apart, when they had like 4 best friends die, when they, you know, whatever, like their people committed suicide, like all these stories. And I knew that would happen. But what I didn't know, what's been so beautiful, is that then they start talking about how God met them in that. Like, I anticipated the tragedy, but what I didn't know is I was worried this would like break my faith. What's amazing is that like the fact that these people were like still standing, still breathing, like still had joy in their life, and were able to say like, it was horrible. Yeah. But like, I saw how God met me in this. I saw how God met me in this. There's all this stuff I've learned about God that I wouldn't have. There's grace that I wasn't expecting. But also, like, they're still standing and breathing. They're still reading. They're still enjoying things in life. Like, there's that kind of life on the other side of tragedy. It actually has really been encouraging. So I was like, I can't do this. But I didn't expect... They're not only talking about the worst thing that ever happened to him, they're also talking about God to me. So lots of people have preached back to me, basically, how God's faithfulness in the middle of this. So, yeah.
Wow. That's so.
So I wrote the book.
Well, and like you just said, I'm sure you hear this all the time. I've given your book to a number of people, and what you're describing is the experience. What you've given is a gift for people to be able to say, wow, I'm allowed to ask that question. I'm not just going to move past this. Even after the fact, kind of the way you described, where sometimes people can't ask those questions while they're in it. They're just trying to do their life.
Just get through the day.
That's right.
Yeah.
But then they kind of find it a more settled place. And it's the exact thing you described. Is it dangerous for me to even rework that? Like, what if I get lost in that hole?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I think your book does is give people a way to go, no, I won't be lost in that hole. God is in there. God was in that. God is with me now. God can help me think about that. And it enables me to think differently about the rest of my life. I'm not just waiting for the penny to drop or trying to avoid a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Because there's always a way through. Even if it just is day by day, like you were saying, or hour by hour, or just for the morning, or to get through the night. I'm very grateful for you writing that. I want to ask one last question with it. If you have energy, here it is. What would you write differently, or what would you add as you kind of think back through what you got a chance to write? Because once you write something like this, you have all the exchanges like you just described, and then you're suddenly aware of like 2 other thoughts, or there's a thought you had, you're like, I actually would say that differently now, or I would add to it, or I would combine these 2 thoughts, or whatever. You're always editing, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because you're growing and changing. Do you have things that you'd be like, man, I would want to say this other thing, or I'd want to shift that a little bit?
Man, that's a really hard question.
It is.
It's hard in general. It's particularly hard now because the book hasn't been out that long. So it's not...
Sure.
I mean, it's been out just over a year. So there's not been like that much that's changed, I think with Liturgy, the Ordinary, which just came out in 2016, like...
You have more time. Right.
There's a lot that I would change, right?
Totally.
Because culture shifted, things have shifted. But the other thing is, I never read my books after they come out, so I don't remember what it says. Truly, I have vague memories of that. Man, what would I change?
Or not, or maybe add, like, here's the thing that I've realized after writing that, or even as I talk to people when they come up to me, a thing I've learned or seems to fit. You don't have to have anything. Maybe you don't have anything. Maybe it's perfect and complete.
The book is perfect. I don't remember it well enough. I really don't. Because I think the last chapter I really like, but I have people are always like, the last chapter is amazing. I'm like, I don't remember what's in the last chapter. I liked it. I remember it was important. So
I love it.
I think I'm going to sort of answer your question in a roundabout way, which is that I don't know if I would change something about this book, but this is what I'm now wrestling with in conversation with this book, is joy. I'm struggling with joy. Like, what is joy? Joy. Okay, so there's a chapter in the book, Shield the Joyous. By far the hardest chapter for me to write. By far. And part of it, during that chapter, I asked a bunch of pastors, like, talk to me about joy. Because, again, like with the collaboration thing.
Right.
Because I wrote it, my editor was like, this is rubbish. And she was nicer than that, but does basically.
Like, this doesn't work.
We need to change. So I was like, I don't know what to say. So I started asking all these people about joy. This is what I found out. Pastors are horrible at talking about joy, like horrible. They're all saying contradictory things to each other. A lot of them make joy sound like, dear God, I hope that never happens to me. Like, it just sounds like, because it's always like, it's not happiness. It's not happiness. And I'm like, okay, good.
Thank you.
And then,
now I know what it's not,
like,
right?
So then it,
what is
then
it?
It
right.
is always framed as like, when you have no money, no food, you don't have shoes, wife has died.
That's what we call joy.
Then, in that moment, like, you can still have joy. And I'm like,
okay, tell me what.
But then, so then it always just sounds like this whole, like this stoic. To me, it came across as the stoic trust in God when everything went bad, and it's sort of like, oh dear, like that's the last. But then when you read about joy, even in the Bible, it seems like, man, that seems like a good thing, like something you'd want,
the kind of thing you hope for. Right?
Yeah. But then I'm back to like, so my kids are healthy and my life is flourishing and my thing, which is like apparently not joy. And so then it's like, okay, so what is it? And it's like, well, it's fruit of the Spirit. And I'm like, yeah.
Say more. Right.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Right. We're closer. Right. Yeah.
But like, what is that?
We're circling around this. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So they're just horrible at talking about joy. And this is still a problem. I am a pastor and I am also horrible at talking about joy. So the first time my editor edited the chapter on joy, she was like, this this is too dark. Like, it's too dark. Like, the whole book's dark.
The chapter on joy we were looking for some a bright light in here. Okay, I got it.
Like, the whole book is dark, and then joy is like
darker somehow. Right.
Like, so, yeah. But then COVID hit. And she read it again. And she was like, no, this is good. In the sense that, in this sense, I hope my editor would be okay with me sharing this. I remember she highlighted, like I said something about like hope in Jesus or joy, and she highlighted it and just wrote, there are more bodies than can fit in morgues in Italy right now. Mm-hmm. Which was not she later admitted, she's like, that wasn't a particularly helpful edit. But she was...
But it's what's on my mind.
She was interacting with the text.
Totally.
With that this was the early part of COVID.
Yes.
And so what I was really trying... Because the part on joy is not just like, and now let's have the good news. That is not the... It's in what I call the taxonomy of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about how that joyfulness is fragile, that it's vulnerable in a broken world. It is. Like, any of us could have profound trauma at any moment. And it is like the grace of God that is keeping that. And so what does it mean to risk joy when there's no guarantees that, like, we'll be healthy, our kids will be healthy, we'll have, a nice house. Like, what's it mean to, like, yet have joy? So that's the chapter. And I like how it turned out, but it feels a little incomplete to me.
Yeah, there's more to say.
And and because I think that's right. I think I'm naming something right there about the fragility of joy. And I think what I was pushing back on, what I was trying to push back on, is this idea of sort of #blessed, like that blessing kind of looks like the American dream. Like our sense of, we have really, really conflated joy and privilege. We've really conflated joy and prosperity, wealth. We think joy is like a consumer good. And I don't mean that we think we can buy joy on Amazon. I don't think anyone thinks that really. But we think, well, if my kids are healthy enough, I can, whatever you're into. For me, it's like if I can like have enough leisure, go hiking enough, have it, that I'll have joy. But that's still a pretty kind of privileged prosperity view of joy. Yeah. It's just like my hippie version of it. So I was pushing against that. But I'm also seeing more and more, I think there's a tendency in our culture toward hopelessness. And towards actually saying joy isn't real. Yeah. And joy is just like privileged white people talking about their
beach vacation or whatever.
Beach vacation,
right.
yeah. #blessed.
Right.
If you claim joy, you just don't care enough about injustice. You're not being honest about the brokenness of the world. So then joylessness, anger, sneering becomes conflated with conviction, with passion for justice, in a way that I feel like is unbalanced.
Yeah.
So I really do think there's like a deep joylessness in culture now, and that absolutely applies to the church. Yes. I don't think I have a piece coming out in a couple weeks that says like I don't think anyone would look at the American church and be like, that is a people uniquely marked by joy. Like I don't think that's what people are seeing. But it's not just the church. It's not like anyone. I'm not like,
yeah, there's no other vendor.
Oh, the CrossFit. Right. They're like joyful. That's like my first thing I would say about them. Or like, there's no subculture. The evangelicals, that is a joyful group. Like, I just don't see joy. Here's what I'm saying is like, I was pushing back against this like really thin version of joy and saying like, what's real joy? What's it mean that joy is fragile? What's it mean to risk joy? And I think that's good. But I also think that there's like a baptism of pessimism that's like really unhelpful. And that's what so it's baptism of like pessimism, cynicism. It's usually on the left. On the right, it's a baptism of rage, of anger, of the politics of resentment. that's then called conviction or Christianity. And just nobody has joy. And so I guess what I'm just struggling with, like I'm glad I pushed back against like a shallow view of joy, but I'm still really curious of what it means to cast like a vision of true joy that actually looks joyful. It makes people go like, I want to be part of that. Like, I want in on
some
that.
brooding, hidden experience.
It's not some spiritual experience.
Like you can't see it, but there's deep joy.
Yeah, exactly.
right. Trust me.
I trust Jesus no matter what. And when I didn't have any shoes or money, I still did, or like I still would, because it's a imaginative exercise.
Yeah, right.
But I'm definitely gonna like, yell at my wife, flick someone off on the way to work, or like say like own the lit, cry more lib on, but like joy in Jesus, right? Like, so I just think there's something I'm not getting about joy, and it's bugging me.
Man, I am so excited for that book.
That's not another book. I don't think so. I'm not planning on writing a book on joy. Maybe I am.
Well, it sounds like you're exploring it.
There's something about joy that's eluding me, and I feel like, see, it's a vulnerable thing that I'm saying, because I'm like. Buy my book. The chapter on joy kind of sucks. I'm not trying to say that. I actually really like the chapter on joy, but there's something that I feel like there's more there. I'm not getting something. I'm just not getting it, and there's something I'm not saying that needs to be said, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know.
That's really helpful. No, and I think that helps people keep exploring. I mean, I think the best thing that we do as leaders and pastors is demonstrate growth. I love that little bit where Paul's challenging Timothy, and he says, pretty much do all this stuff in public. Like, preach the word, read the scriptures, do all the things. Watch your life and your doctrine, so that others can see your progress.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit of a backhanded challenge, because it's like he's saying, you're probably not that great, honestly. Like, there's some things you're going to need to grow in. But do it in such a way that people get to watch.
Yeah.
And that's important for leaders to do. That when we show up with everything buttoned up, we give people false paradigms of how growth really works. So I think it's really important that we keep looking at people saying, there's this thing I'm right now working through. And when people get to watch that, like the worst case scenario is a leader is the same 5 to 10 years from now, or a communicator. That's a really bad thing, I think.
Yeah.
Because it means we're not growing, which means then people don't really know what that looks like. Or we become the purveyor of wisdom, like we're some guru that sits on the mountain and these things descend on us.
Yeah.
Or we always tell them in the rearview mirror. It's always, I'm sure you've experienced this, like with even the little area, that bit of time you describe. That later, when I describe something I was learning or growing in a period of time, and inevitably somebody goes, I was your friend then. I can remember the most encouraging thing is when they say, that's actually true. I could see that. That's amazing. You can see that now. It's a little less encouraging when they're like, I had no idea. Really? Like that was happening? Jay, that's terrible news. I'm so sorry. I wish I could have had access to that. I wish I had known. And again, that's where I find what you've written in this book really powerful. Because for friends of mine, I mean, I'll share an example. I have a friend whose husband has had cancer over and over, and it just doesn't seem to go away. There are like 7 different kinds of treatment in, and all the questions you're describing, like, I don't trust God, but I do feel like I've lost something about how I thought things with God worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what does that mean? Does that mean that was an illusion? And then she had this whole window where, we worked through together of her being like, I need to just tell people, like, this thing you're doing, you believe about God's stupid and not real. And then, so she kind of became an anti-evangelist in that sense. Like, you think you're safe, you're not safe. And then, but then it occurred to her, that's probably not helpful either, because she's trying to, really what she's doing is working it out.
Totally.
I don't know what this is. And so I'm externalizing it to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's why a resource like you're writing and you have written helps people go, oh, like humans talk about these things and they think about these things. And to your point, people have written about these things before. But there's ways that God breathes on things by his Spirit. And I think he's breathed on this book that you've written. That's why we want people to read it. I'm really grateful. Yeah. Well, thanks for making time. We took a long time here. Thanks for making time to talk. Can we do it again sometime?
Flew to my house. Yeah.
But people, you won't necessarily do a podcast if people
I need
fly
to be
your
friends
house.
with you before you come to my
There
house.
you go.
That's
okay,
what
good.
I'm saying.
And you don't just show up. You've agreed and all this
We've
stuff.
had a conversation about it.
That's good.
At least one.
See, we're back at the beginning. Anyway, thanks. And I would love to be able to talk to you sometime in the future again.
Yes.
That'd be fun. We'd even come back.
You should come back. I could come to you too.
You could.
I had a dream
That you were in
Vineyard
Denver.
People
Yeah, you could
last
come and hang
night
out.
That I was worshiping with you guys in Denver.
We would have a good time. You would have to sleep a lot before you
Oh
came.
my gosh. I'm going to sleep forever now.
Thank you. That's it. We're done.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.